Hey, welcome to Podsongs. Each episode I interview an inspiring person and write a song about them. Today, I've got a computer scientist turned philosopher who specializes in ontology and the philosophy of mind. We go deep into his meditations on life and the universe. Let me please introduce you to Bernardo Kastrup. Is that the right word?
Yeah. It's not by choice.
Not by so.
It's imposed on me.
By who? By
I don't know, the powers that be.
Because you've been averaging a book a year, and
yeah. But if you look at it in context, it's not much. Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Not that I'm comparing myself to them. But they have been known to write 5, 6, 8 volumes in 1 year. So when inspiration comes, when the muse comes, you are a hostage. You have to do what it wants you to do.
I guess so. Wow. I mean, I think you did 15. Because you also do papers. You're also writing for journals. I read that your last book, you let's just put this in context. So you weren't happy with the reviews for your previous book, so you decided to get a second Ph.D. and publish 15 peer-reviewed papers. You don't take criticism well.
It was not an explicit criticism of a particular book or of a particular thing I did. It is just, people, when they don't really have good arguments, they take a cheap shot at you. And it has happened to me a couple of times that people say, if this is so revolutionary, why don't you submit your work to peer review? And then I thought, you know what? All right. And then 2016, I started doing it. And then by late 2018, I had published, 15 academic papers, 14, because the last one was already in 2019, and in insignificant journals. And then I thought, hey, I know that it takes 5 to 7 for a PhD, because I already had a PhD. And then I thought, why not? It's for free now. I have done all the hard work.
Because let's back up a bit. So you were a computer scientist originally. That's your original.
My original
thing.
Background.
Okay, so why aren't you? What's wrong? You've left the path. You've gone against all your training. No, I mean you were brought up in the materialistic world, and maybe.
But I was interested in
that.
I have been interested in philosophy all my life. Since I can remember. You can imagine the naive philosophy a child tries to engage in, but as a child, I nonetheless did try to think philosophically. I didn't even know that it was called philosophy. I just entertained thoughts about what is this and what is the nature of this all. And that sort of fell to the background in my teens. When I went to university, I had just turned 17. And, you get that script from society that you have to study something that will give you a future. And I loved computers since I was 6-year-old, and I got my first ZX81. I've loved computers. And I thought, hey, it's a good profession, guaranteed future. And so that's what I did. I did computer engineering. My professional life, for most of it, for the past 20, my first job was in 96 at CERN, so it's been 24 years.
CERN, well, that's the top now,
Yeah, so for 24 years, I've basically done technology, first as a computer engineer, then as a scientist. I worked as a scientist both at CERN and at Philips Research. And then as an entrepreneur, I started a company that eventually was sold to Intel. And then I landed in high-tech strategy, technology strategy, which I have been doing for the past 15 years. But next to that, I have always done philosophy. That passion may not have been my way of earning my living, but it has always been what my daimon wanted me to do. So I've always done it. I've published my first book 10 years ago or more. And now there has been a complete switch, because now I have quit the corporate world. I no longer do high-tech strategy. And I lead a foundation on philosophy of mind and neuroscience of consciousness and foundations of physics. So, which is all hardcore philosophy, building up this foundation now. So yeah, it's a reversal, but for my personal life, very little has changed. It's just which one of these two sides pays my bill. But I keep on doing both.
Oh, it's fantastic, because from reading your work, you're taking the argument to the academia, to the scientists, to the materialists, but you're coming to it on their terms. You see, a lot of 99% of people who leave business and they go to the spiritual, or they you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
But you're using their language to deconstruct their arguments.
I can't help, because that's how I think to myself. The way I go about reasoning about philosophy, what's the nature of reality and all that, I use those values, that language in my own thinking. It's how I am put together. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just because I went to university so early that sort of got entrenched in me, that way of thinking. But people get surprised when I announce unambiguously that, hey, I am an extreme reductionist. I am a reductionist. I am a naturalist. I am all for reason. I'm so much for reason that I think reason has some very sharp limits that you can derive by reasoning. Through reasoning, you can see what the limits of reasoning are. So it's not really a concession. Partly it is a concession because through personal experience, I have arrived at insights that cannot be translated into concepts, cannot be translated into explicit steps of reasoning. And I know that they are valid because I've been in that place, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I've used two books to try to talk around those subjects. One was meaning absurdity, and the other one was more than allegory. But in all the other books, it's my natural self. It's not really a concession to our rationalism that I speak its language or that I use its values. It's a big part of me as well.
So where do you get your ideas? Where do you get this inspiration? What are you doing at that moment? Are you meditating? Are you taking the dog for a walk? Are you...
It's completely random. Usually I think about something for a while, and I don't come to an answer. And then at some point when I'm not thinking about it, just pops. I don't know. I mean, pops during a shower has happened, or in the middle of the night. I have been known by my girlfriend to jump out of bed at 3 a.m. and come here when I am now, and because I need to write something before I forget, because it just has come to me at 3 a.m. So
because my mind is external, because you're channeling this.
I have a instinctive aversion to the word channeling used in this. Things pass through me. So in that sense, I'm a kind of a channel. But
so what's wrong with that?
I don't know. Back in the 80s, in the New Age part of our culture, this word was used in some very loose senses. And I get all prickly when people say, oh, you're channeling, and go like, oh, no, like an urchin.
But so let's analyze that. So you acknowledge the ideas are coming outside of you.
Outside of my ego. What am I? Am I my ego? Am I you? Am I the rest of the world? That's an open philosophical question, but it's definitely from outside that part of me that I have the ability to introspect into. It's definitely from outside that. It just pops. It pops up. Now, from which part of me or from which part of nature it comes from, I have a suspicion. I know I have all these ideas about dissociation.
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? Yeah. Where the higher self, your outside you? This is what your books are trying to.
It definitely comes from somewhere else other than my ego self, my narrative of personal identity. It doesn't come from my narrative of personal identity because I've never been able to force these insights to come. They have a life of their own. They come in their own accord. Often, even the approach to argument also pops. It's not something I really create by explicit steps of reasoning. You know, how to communicate something. Often that also just pops. It comes ready, packaged and ready, like this way. Now go
because
and do it.
you do it very well. You know, you because the persuasive argument is key, really, because you're tackling issues and people who don't accept the ideas that you put in your book. So the way you phrase it is even more important than the actual idea. No?
That probably that is right. Yeah, I've noticed that because I have this natural tendency to argue things according to the standard values of reductionism, naturalism, explanatory power, empiricism. I've noticed that when I'm arguing along these lines with some people, they feel surprised that this kind of argument goes together with the kind of conclusions I arrive at. They don't expect these two things to come together. They think that anybody who says, what's going on is one universal mind outside time and space, they expect that you will substantiate by saying, when you meditate, you arrive at that insight from first-person experience, but that's not what I do. I say, okay, let's start from the empirical facts.
That's what I mean. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say, yeah.
Some people get confused with it, I have noticed. Like, they take a while to accept that I'm making an argument for A according to the style B that for them never come together. They don't belong together.
It's beautiful. So can you just, for people that don't know your work, can you just summarize all the books you've written and all the arguments?
It's very easy. 30 seconds.
So okay. The last book you did was Idea of the World. Maybe
now there's a new one just out, Decoding Schopenhauer's Metaphysics. It's just come out like a couple of days ago. Okay, here's the shtick. I think materialism has gone wrong in replacing reality for a description of reality. Materialism has reified the description, and they now say the description is prior to the reality that is described. What is mass, charge, momentum, geometrical relationships, amplitude, frequency? What are these things other than ways to describe an experiential reality that we experience through our five senses, the world out there? But they, having had this very useful descriptions, they now say, well, all that exists is the description, and the world of our experience is just conjured up inside our heads. What is really out there is mass, charge, momentum, amplitude, frequency. So now we replaced reality with a description, and then we become amazed that we can't reconstruct reality from that description. We can't deduce the qualities of experience from physical quantities, which is the hard problem of consciousness. And I think the way to go about it is so obvious once you understand it, that you're just amazed that our society has got it so wrong for so long, which is, look, there is obviously a world out there that would still exist, that would still hold a state, even if nobody were here to look at it. But that world is obviously not physical, because what we call physical is just a description. It's the quantities of physics. It's a description. It's the self-portrait. It's not a person. What is out there is the mental. In other words, it's of the same nature that we have direct access to when we experience our own selves. Why postulate this second category, fundamentally different from experience, to explain an external world? We don't need it. What is out there is of the same nature that I am, which is conscious experience. But it is out there in the sense that it's not my personal conscious experience. It's not your personal conscious experience alone. These are transpersonal experiential states that present themselves to us according to what we call the physical world on the screen of perception. And why does it look like perception instead of like a thought or an emotion, an endogenous experiential state? Because evolution has favored the development of our sensory apparatus to give us a perspective of the world at a glance. Otherwise, we would be like a telepath lost in the middle of a big activist protest. We would go crazy. We wouldn't be able to make sense of it. That's one reason. The other reason is, we have to protect ourselves against the second law of thermodynamics. If we would just mirror the states of the world out there in our inner states, observer states, as physicists call it, we would just dissolve into an entropic soup. There would be too much variety of states if we were to mirror the entire external world inside ourselves. So our perception has to encode information about the outside world. So instead of feeling the feelings and the emotions, transpersonal feelings and emotions that are out there, we put all of it, we code all of it in a kind of dashboard of dials. Imagine that you're a driver, but you don't have a windshield. You don't have transparent glass. You can't see the world directly. You only have a very sophisticated dashboard with all kinds of quantities. Now, is that literally what the world outside is? No. Should you take it seriously? You bet. It's good information about the world. So for me, perception is like a dashboard. It gives us information at a glance in a very convenient way that helps us go against the second law of thermodynamics. And that helps us survive. But what is really out there are transpersonal experiential states that we could compare to, say, certain thoughts and emotions, which Schopenhauer called the will. It's his way of describing that.
So what's the second law of thermodynamics? I've just slipped my mind for the moment.
There is this, law may be too strong a word for it because we still don't quite truly understand it, but everything tends to more disorderly states. To give you an example, if you take a glass of water and a glass of ink, and you drop 3 drops of ink in the water and you mix it, you have come from a more orderly state, water separate from ink, to a more disorderly state, everything mixed together. But you can't reverse it. You can't, unless you spend a lot of energy in that process, you can't naturally go from water and ink mixed together to 3 drops of ink and a glass of water. It doesn't happen naturally. Nature always tends to states of higher disorder. And that's the second law of thermodynamics. Life is a local, quote, violation of the second law of thermodynamics. It's not really a violation because at a universal scale, nothing is being violated. There is just a local illusion of violation. But you can regard life as a local violation of this law because we are highly structured, organized systems. And while in nature, everything tends to higher disorder, we go against it through metabolism, by eating, by breathing. That's how we sort of pull energy in to maintain our state of higher structure. And the argument is, if our perception were to mirror the broad variety of states that are out there, we wouldn't be able to keep our structure, our dynamic structure, and the integrity of our structure. There would be just too much variation of states, and we would just dissolve. Like ink mixing in water, you wouldn't be able to recover us. We would dissolve into a soup. And that's why perception is like a dashboard. It provides encoded inferential information about the world. And that's why perception feels so different than thoughts and feelings, even though what is really out there are transpersonal experiential states of the kind that you would describe as thoughts and feelings. And this completely circumvents the hard problem of consciousness. And it's much more parsimonious because you don't have to postulate any ontological category beyond that which you know to exist, because its nature is given, and that is experience. All there is experience, but experience presents itself in different forms depending on perspective.
Oh, gosh, I feel like, it's like in that Goodwill Hunting, you know, that bit in the movie where Matt Damon's chatting to the girls in the bar, you know.
Oh, no, you do me too much honor, sir.
I'm the Ben Affleck character going, I'm with him. Yeah. I'm not looking for any action, but if I was, we should go out, but gosh, yeah, that's deep, So yeah, I mean, that's, you're trying to sum it up in kind of, you're arguing that it's stupid to say that materialism, consciousness comes from materialism. Obviously, consciousness creates materialism.
Yeah, the materialist would not deny that. the materialist would say, yes, all I know about myself is indeed, from a first-person perspective, is indeed consciousness, and I indeed abstracted the concept of matter outside and independent of consciousness, but maybe it is true. Maybe my abstraction is true, and that's the key claim of materialism. And I would even say, well, that would be okay if, one, there weren't better alternatives, but there are, and two, you didn't face insoluble problems by postulating this to begin with. And you do, the hard problem of consciousness, which is fundamentally insoluble. So based on these two arguments, I would say it's totally invalid to try to pursue this hopeless avenue of thought. It's self-contradictory.
It's a new argument, isn't it? It wasn't always this argument through our history.
The main argument is based on a surprising lack of philosophical imagination. The main argument goes as follows. There obviously is a world out there outside my personal mind and your personal mind. Obviously, I grant that. Yeah. Two, we can't change this world by merely wishing it to be different. Otherwise, the world would be very different right now because I wish it to be very different. Granted, that's obvious too. And three, your inner experience correlates with your brain state. You just need to drink alcohol and you know that that is true. I agree with that too. That's also undeniable. And then the materialist will say, well, given these three undeniable observations, there is only one way to make sense of it. And that is to say that what is out there is non-mental. But that's an amazing illustration of an absurd lack of philosophical imagination. No, what is out there is mental too. It's just not in your personal mind. It's just not in your neighbor's or your cat's personal minds. But it is mental. It's transpersonal mentation. And indeed, I can't change the world by merely wishing it to be different, because although it's mental, it's not in my mind. It's not within the boundaries of my dissociated processes. It's dissociated from me, so I can't change it. And three, of course, brain activity correlates with inner experience because brain activity is what inner experience looks like from an outside perspective, from across a dissociative boundary. So of course it has to correspond. One thing is the image of the other, not the cause of the other. And that's a very important difference. Flames are what combustion looks like. They're not the cause of combustion. Lightning is what atmospheric electric discharge looks like. It's not the cause of atmospheric electric discharge. So materialism has been riding on the back of this lack of philosophical imagination for 300 or 400 years now. It's amazing.
So whose fault is it then? So who did it? When did this change?
I don't think.
Which philosopher introduced? Was it the Enlightenment or?
Well, of course, this thing started congealing in the Enlightenment, but I wouldn't blame any individual. This is the historical development of the human collective consciousness, so to say, what Jung would call the collective unconscious of humanity. That there is no blame to be assigned to individuals here.
But whose ideas are they? Whose Jung is against this is material? Because you're also writing a book about Jung, aren't you?
Yeah, it's coming out next year.
Okay, so is Jung against this materialism as well?
Oh yeah, Jung was Jung spared no words against materialism. He vigorously called it ridiculous, a sham. He was quite open.
So why didn't he win? Why didn't he win? Why are we not following the philosophers of today, following him, and why are they following another guy?
When there is a major underlying current to an entire civilization, it has to run its course. You can't dam it. It builds too much momentum on its own.
The collective consciousness.
Yeah. And it started as a reaction to religious dogmatism, which arguably was something that indeed needed a reaction.
Okay, so the opposite.
Yeah, but because everybody was so focused on being against dogmatic dualism or dogmatic religion. I'm pro-religion. I'm against dogmatism because every reasonable person was focused on being against that. The church had so much power. It was so difficult for the Enlightenment scientists and intellectuals to go against that. Just as it is difficult for us today to go against materialism, for them it was excruciatingly difficult. So of course the entire focus goes to what they are against. as opposed to what the right alternative is.
Yeah.
And by the time we started thinking, but is this the right alternative? Guess what? There was already so much momentum behind it that it has become the new religious dogma. And now here we are, starting a new process in the 21st century. It will flip again. Hopefully it will flip now to a very reasonable point. We will not get blinded by being against. We will be focused on what is the best that we can make of what we know empirically and the way we can reason. What's the best alternative based on these objective values, as opposed to how do we go against the mainstream?
But what would be the opposite? If we will be terrible and we will act the worst. What's the worst case scenario against materialism reaction?
I think it's constitutive panpsychism.
Okay, what's that?
It's the idea that every individual elementary subatomic particle is fundamentally conscious. Okay. In other words, there is something it is like to be an electron. There is something it is like to be the Higgs boson or a quark.
Okay.
But that runs into an insoluble problem of its own. How do you combine fundamentally separate subjectivities into a meta-subject? How does the subjectivity of the subatomic particles in my brain combine to form my unified inner life? It's an insoluble problem.
But what would a society look like based on panpsychism?
You would grant validity to crazy ideas like a sophisticated computer is conscious, so you can't turn it off. You would start passing laws to defend the right of robots. This kind of complete nonsense. Anyway,
I just want to know what's going to happen.
and it wouldn't solve the key problem because under panpsychism, matter is still fundamental. It just happens to have, next to mass, charge, momentum, another little fundamental property that we call experience.
Because if you anesthetize a piece of metal and then cut it, it experiences less stress fractures and less...
Well, a panpsychist would say that there is nothing it's like to be the piece of metal. There is only something it is like to be the individual elementary subatomic particles that constitute the piece of metal. But arguably, you are doing something to it. And it would legitimize the idea that, if little subjects combine to form my consciousness, then maybe they are combining a computer to form a computer consciousness. And then at some point we will be marrying computers because we think they are conscious. I have no doubt they will be intelligent to the point that they could even pass for humans. But there will be nothing it's like to be them in and of themselves. But if panpsychism wins this next juncture in our historical development in the West, I think it will open the door to all this, and it will not solve the key problems of materialism, which is that it drains meaning out of life, that it puts down emotions as merely derivative phenomenon. Panpsychism would endorse that, because my human emotion would also be a derivation of experiential states of elementary subatomic particles that have nothing to do with emotion.
So what's your alternative to panpsychism then, as an alternative
idealism.
to materialism?
Yeah, I think
idealism.
There aren't gazillions of fundamental little consciousnesses in nature. There is only one spatially unbound consciousness that isn't anything like a human consciousness. And living beings are dissociated complexes of this one universal consciousness. Every living being is a dissociated alter of this universal consciousness. And that's why we can't change the world by merely wishing it to be difficult. We are dissociated from it. What we call life, metabolism, biology, is what dissociation at that level looks like from across a dissociative boundary. Life is the image of dissociation in universal consciousness. It's what the process looks like. It had to look like something, right? It's a process in nature. Had to look like something. And guess what? Yes, it looks like something very unique that we call metabolism. Mitosis, protein folding, all this good stuff that you only see in living organisms and not in the rest of nature. So the individual subatomic particles in my mind, in my brain, they are not conscious in and of themselves. There's nothing it's like to be them. There's only something it is like to be me, to be a whole living being. And subatomic particles are just an artifact of perception. The screen of perception, just like a computer display, is pixelated. I mean, I'm looking at your image right now. If I start zooming in, I will see little rectangular blocks. But you are not made of rectangular blocks. You just appear to me with this artifact, this resolution artifact that we call pixels. I would say subatomic particles, they don't really exist as entities in and of themselves. They are a pixelation artifact of this dashboard that evolution created for us that we call the screen of perception. And you may say, well, but we know of subatomic particles not because we can see them, but because we have instruments that allow us to infer them. Be that as it may, the instruments only help insofar as you perceive the output of the instruments. So we are always only talking about the screen of perception if you're talking about physicality. With or without instrumentation, it's always about the screen of perception. And it's only very natural that it would have a resolution limit that in our models we call elementary subatomic particles. So I don't think the subatomic particles are even there really in and of themselves to begin with, let alone being conscious in and of themselves.
Because that ties in. I'm getting all this synchronicity with my guests on my podcast because I had a lady a couple of weeks ago who experienced spontaneous cosmic consciousness, where she realized that we are all one. Everything is one. She zoomed in on the atom and out on the universe, the galaxy, and there's a reflection. And she had this huge cosmic consciousness experience, which is the stage above enlightenment. So that you realize that we are all, everything is one, and there is this, call it God, call it the universal, call it the one, the absolute. So you're saying the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not necessarily, because you use the word absolute, which is an echo of Hegel's absolute idealist philosophy. The only thing I would add is that I'm still a naturalist, so I don't think this cosmic consciousness beyond our own consciousness, because we are part of it. So insofar as we have certain mental aptitudes, then you can say that it has it too because we are part of it. But if you ignore us, if you ignore life and just focus on the rest of cosmic consciousness, I don't think it is what we call metacognitive. I don't think it is deliberate, self-aware, self-reflective. I think it's rather instinctive, spontaneous, because the laws of nature seem to be so predictable. Otherwise, we wouldn't have technology. The fact that we have technology shows that we can predict how nature will behave. So the patterns of behavior of nature are very predictable, which suggests that from the first person perspective, nature is conscious, but it is instinctively so. It doesn't have a premeditated plan. It's not deliberating about what it's going to do next. It's doing what it does because it is what it is. It's spontaneous behavior. Know what I mean? And that goes against a little bit Hegelian philosophy, which seems to suggest that the absolute has a plan, even has a plan for us. And I don't think that is the case. At least not entirely the case.
But wasn't there a quote from? Wasn't there a quote from Cicero that, or someone, that we are the universe, that, well, we are created conscious beings. We are being created by the universe, so the universe must be conscious. No.
Yes, I think I cannot trace it back to Cicero, but I agree with what you just said. Yeah, I don't think it is coherent for consciousness to postulate the existence of something that is not consciousness, and then try to reason how consciousness could have arisen from this postulate of consciousness itself. This is like a painter who paints a self-portrait and then points at the self-portrait and says, I am it. And then tries to explain his own inner life or her own inner life based on the patterns of pigment distribution on canvas. It's completely hopeless. So I would agree with what you said. Consciousness is primary. It's the sole given of nature. We should only go beyond it if we absolutely need to. And we don't. We have perfectly good explanations without requiring this extra postulate.
Yeah, because we are. So you also, your position on reincarnation would be?
vague and undefined. Look, I think there is only one consciousness going on, only one subject. Our core subjectivity, before you have a narrative of personal self, our core subjectivity is it. You are it. I am it. My cat is it.
Right.
The amoeba swimming in my toilet is it. The core subjectivity of all of us is one and the same. It's identical in all of us. It's only the contents of consciousness that we choose to identify with that can change, because this one subjectivity takes on multiple points of view. So your narrative of personal identity, I think, is nonsensical. You know, your personal memories, the idea that you are this person with this name at this point in history, these are all contents of consciousness. It's not what you are. What you are is the witness of all this. It's the thing that is experiencing all this, what Schopenhauer called the one eye of the world that looks out from every creature. I mean, is there a better way to describe it? Man was a genius. It's right on, bullseye. From that perspective, the real you cannot disappear. Where are you going to go? You are the one thing that's going on. Where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to disappear into. You are the thing where everything else arises and vanishes. You are the framework where existence takes place. Birth and death happen within that which you are. So from that perspective, you bet we are all eternal. But is Bernardo Kastrup eternal? Oh, you bet he's not. Thank God. Thank God. It would be horrible if Bernardo Kastrup would go on life after life. Now, you see, I think life is the image of a dissociative process in universal consciousness. Therefore, death is the end of the dissociation, is the reabsorption of your inner life into a broader context that is not personal, that is transpersonal, or even impersonal, or apersonal at least. So I wonder if there is anything there to be reincarnated, if your individuality is not preserved beyond this current state that you call a living being. What is there to reincarnate? Because your individuality may vanish, but the contents of your consciousness won't, for the same reason that you can remember a dream when you wake up. You see, when you are in a dream, you are dissociated. You identify yourself with the avatar in the dream, but not with the parts of minds that are conjuring up the rest of the dream. The streets, the cars, the trees, the other characters, you think you're not them, right?
Yeah.
So you are, in a dream, you are dissociated from a big part of your own mind. You think you are that avatar and not the rest. When you wake up, the dissociation ends and you realize, oh, I was doing the whole thing. I was doing the avatar and I was doing the cars, the streets, the trees, the whole shebang. It was just me. Nobody's mourning the death of your dream avatar. It was just a little dissociative process that ended. Nobody's mourning the death of the avatar. For the same reason, I don't think anybody needs to mourn his or her own death. You're just waking up. Dissociation is ending. And you realize that you're doing the whole thing. Now, does it make sense then to talk about the reincarnation of your dream avatar when you go to sleep the next night and you dream again? If you say it does, then I believe in reincarnation. If you say it doesn't, then I don't believe in reincarnation. It depends.
So you're firm, because there is much evidence that I agree, because I was going to call this podcast "The Blind Men and the Elephant," because we're all feeling different bits of the elephant, and we're all right. And I completely agree with you, the one cosmic consciousness, but some of these details I'm not. I can take up a contrary approach to you, because I've seen on your website you engage in many arguments with other metaphysics. So.
Yeah, and I'm very close to people, very serious investigators from the University of Virginia and School of Medicine.
University of Virginia, yeah.
Yeah. And
they've done a big 40 years now.
Yes. And I admire them. I know many of them personally. I've worked together with a few of them.
Really?
Actually, we have a book coming out maybe next year. I don't know. I did my part. Now it's out of my hands. And they are very serious researchers. They are very focused on empirical investigation? Do we
Definitely,
have
yeah.
good reasons to think that an individual agent after death can pop into life again? And they have some very compelling evidence that something
birthmarks and
memories,
yeah, physical marks, loss of fingers.
I would offer a different interpretation of that data as a hypothesis. I'm sure that some of them could go and say, well, your hypothesis is not good because of this, this, and that, and I might even accept that. But just to stimulate thinking, look, again, back to the dream analogy. When you wake up, your dream avatar is dead, it's toast, right? The dissociation ended. Your dream avatar is history, it's gone.
No, because a lot of what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of it's astral projection at night. You dreaming, okay, dream is most of it's dream, but when you have very vivid experiences, you actually project from the body and go to the astral realms.
Okay, let's ignore it. Do you accept that there are some dreams that are not astral projections?
Yes.
Okay, so let's focus only on this. I don't need them all to be like I'm saying. I just need one of them to be. It's enough.
Okay, hit me.
So let's take one dream that's not an astral projection. And then you wake up. So your dissociation ended. You realized you were doing everything in that dream. And your avatar is toast, is dead. The moment you woke up, your avatar is toast. But you remember the dream from the perspective of the avatar. So that dissociated agency that was your dream avatar ceased to exist. He merged back into what was really going on all along, which was you. But you remember the inner life of that dream avatar. So although that separated, dissociated entity ceased to exist, the contents of its consciousness endure. Yeah. So I think when we die, we are like the dream avatar in this one dream we are talking about. As individual agents, dissociated aspects of universal consciousness, I think we cease to exist. Hopefully. Fingers crossed from my side. But what we then realize we were all along, which is universal consciousness, we'll remember our inner life in the same way that we remember the inner life of one of our dream avatars. Mm-hmm. And it is possible then, it is conceivable then, that somebody who is still living, who is still dissociated, in some states of consciousness in which the dissociative boundary becomes more permeable, more porous, may fish from something transpersonal, from the transpersonal mental world that surrounds us, may fish out contents of consciousness, memories, proclivities, whatever, that were once part of another dissociated alter that in the meantime has ended.
Yeah, but your theory lacks a motivation, it misses the point that we are here, we are divine sparks enacting out our own individual narratives, but we are here to progress. So we keep coming back to improve and to raise this spiritual evolution and raise our consciousness every time. If we just immediately every time are absorbed into the collective consciousness, where is the evolution? Where is the progress in this?
It's universal consciousness that is becoming more acquainted with itself through our metacognitive experiences. Because when you wake up, you remember the experiences of your dream avatar. If your dream avatar has had a major insight during the dream, you will remember it as you, even though that dissociated agent, the dream avatar, is gone. So every time one of us dies, it's like a harvest. Birth is the seeding and death is the harvest. Whatever we learned is absorbed into the whole. And what is evolving is the whole.
Yeah, but we are evolving as individuals to a high level, and through the karmic actions, we evolve upwards and upwards and upwards. And we are, I think
you have an entire system there, which I recognize, and I understand that you have your reasons to have come to this system, and then you question my reasons for not endorsing the same system. Yeah. I could reverse the question and say, why should I believe what you're saying? But we don't need to go there. I'll just say this. I am open to the possibility that what you're saying is correct. I think there is even some compelling subjective evidence that something like this might be going on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not ready on the basis of that evidence to categorically state that this is what's going on. I think this is not the most parsimonious way to make sense of empirical experience at the present juncture in history. At some point, we may be forced to a more sophisticated conclusion. But as things are now, I still think that we should stop early in our conceptualizations, if you know what I mean. We shouldn't go too far. There is no need to complicate things more unless there is something empirical that forces us to take that next step. And there might be.
Just defeat materialism and then defeat the common enemy. Because...
But you see the danger. That's how it happens. That's how we get into the trap all over again in a different way. We focus on defeating the common enemy. So the panpsychists, I'm sure that many of them are furious at me because they're like, don't we share an agenda? We are all trying to defeat materialism. And what they don't see is that I come at it from a deeply historical perspective. I don't want to repeat the mistake that was made in the 1600s. To allow.
Beautiful. You're really you're living your theory. You know, we've got to come together, unify, and
For me, this is not merely conceptual. For me, this is not a conceptual card game on a table. For me, this is life.
Wow, that's great. That's a great answer. Better than I thought. Yeah. Gosh, you're so smart. So,
my diamond is smart, Jack, not me.
No. Because you're standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I was told to ask you about Ion by the book by Jung, which is supposed to be very terrifying and quite applicable. I don't know anything about it. Maybe you could tell me a bit about that.
I think if you want something terrifying, it's not Ion. It is Answer to Job. It's a short little book. So sharp, so to the point, so disarming that you can read it in a day, but at the end of that day, you'll be exhausted.
Okay.
And you will not be able to stop thinking about it.
Oh, don't read it then.
Jung referred to Answer to Job as the book that allowed him to have the happiest moment of his life. It was the day after he finished Answer to Job, and he went sailing on the lake. He lived by a lake, Lake Zurich, and he went sailing on the lake, and he thought, I have redeemed my father. His father was a Swiss Reformed clergyman, pastor. I'm not sure if the word pastor is applicable to the Swiss Reformed Church, but you know what I mean. And he felt, I have redeemed my father. And it's a terrifying book because the essence of the book is that, one, you and I are God, and God is us, and God is the rest of what's going on. And God is not only the summum bonum, the highest good, God is also the other side of that coin, the terrifying side of that coin. And so are we. But he doesn't just say this, because otherwise it's so easy to dismiss. You say, well, that's his opinion, I have another opinion. It's the way he weaves his narrative around you in such a way. Yeah. At some point in the book, you can't escape it anymore. It's all over and around you, and you don't have an exit. And it's that compelling. Yeah, very short, tiny little book.
Okay, all right. Well, if I'm having troubles, if I need to stay up all night, I'll read that. Gosh. So what are you adding to the Jungian?
I don't think I'm adding anything to what
with your new book. Are you applying his theories to the modern situation? Are you?
Look, Jung. He was a 19th century man. I mean, he was born in 1875. He had his whole education in the 19th century. So when he was becoming a professional, say 1903, the world, the materialism was really congealing, coalescing into the only plausible, reasonable, rational worldview.
Okay, so you either for God or you were a materialist.
Yeah, either you are a religious nut, which Freud called the dark wave of occultism. That's how Freud referred to it. So Jung was, in that time, he was trying to make a space for him professionally and as a scientist in that time. So he paid lip service to materialism. Well, not lip service in the sense that he never endorsed it, on the contrary, but he chose to not fight it head on, because he felt that his key message was his psychology, not his philosophy. So to be heard as a scientist in the field of psychologist, he acquiesced to the need to not face that monster, to not pick that fight. But he couldn't help. He couldn't help, although he always says in interviews and other pieces that, oh, I'm a psychologist, I'm a scientist, I'm not a philosopher. When you read him, he's a philosopher. He's all the
undercover.
time. Yeah, he's not even undercover. He's making overt philosophical statements all over the place. Not only in Answer to Job, but in his more technical corpus as well. His core psychology books, like On the Nature of the Psyche, which is one of the most technical books Jung has written. It's also one of the most overtly philosophical books he has written. So what I did in my work was just to distill that philosophical part of Jung's work and word it in modern language. Because the language of the time wouldn't be correctly understood today. Even the word consciousness back at the time, today would refer to what they meant as meta-consciousness, metacognitive conscious awareness. But they just used the word consciousness. But what they meant by it was meta-consciousness. So all these little trade-offs in language. And I also tried to do it in a short book that sort of brings together and summarizes all the bits and pieces of philosophical statements that Jung has made across 20 volumes. His collected works are 20 thick volumes. So I'm not really adding anything. I'm just making it more accessible.
That's what I was
making
asking.
it clear.
Yeah. Because of this, the crisis we're living in now and how it's applicable. And
we need to rediscover and pay homage and respect to our predecessors who have seen things that are very important to us today, but which go ignored because, we ignore our predecessors. We think they had nothing intelligent to say, that they are outdated. You know what? Schopenhauer in 1818, when he wrote his magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation, he saw way further than 99.9% of the philosophy of mind community today. Way further. But
for example?
He saw the difference between consciousness and meta-consciousness, although he didn't use these words. But he clearly saw and articulated the difference. He understood the role dissociation plays in the nature of life. He solved avant la lettre the key dilemmas of quantum mechanics today. You see that. Do we have time for me to just give you an idea? The key dilemma of quantum mechanics today is the refutation of what we call physical realism. Quantum mechanics, unless you believe in gazillion universes arising every fraction of a second, if you believe that fairy tale, then maybe there's an alternative. So then you go with the Shan Carroll and these other endorsers of magic that are around in the world of physics. But if we ignore that for the moment, physics has experimentally proven that there is no world of defined physical quantities out there when nobody is measuring, when nobody is looking. I would say looking, but I mean measurement. Measurement is a broader term. In other words, there are no defined objects with defined boundaries, defined position, speed, direction, weight out there when nobody's looking. we have proven this experimentally. Actually, because we don't believe the results of our own experiments, we have been redoing the experiments for 40 years now, every time refining it more and more. In
Are you
physics,
talking about CERN, the work you did at CERN? Is
no,
that?
no. CERN is high-energy physics. This is entanglement. This is delicate physics, not high-energy physics. This can be done in less expensive labs. But we didn't believe the results we got in the late 70s. So we kept on what is called closing the loopholes and redoing the same experiment in more and more sophisticated ways until a point in 2018 when we sort of threw the towel. And it's like, no, now all loopholes are closed. The result is reliable. This is really the case. There is no physical world with objects with defined position, mass, charge, momentum. It's just not there unless you're looking.
But that hasn't got through into the mainstream, no? I mean, that's...
No, not yet, not yet. So what the state of physics now is that everything that is physical is relative, like motion. But not only motion, mass is relative, position is relative, boundaries are relative, geometry is relative, everything is relative. But if all physics is relative and all there is physical, then is it relative to what? You see the dilemma?
Yeah, you have to measure against something.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, it's relative to the observer. Yeah, but what is the observer? Physical system. Okay, then the observer is relative. Relative to what? Well, to another observer. But that's also physical. So it doesn't end. You get into a loop. and that's the dilemma. If all there is physical, and all physics is relative, then you have a problem. Schopenhauer solved this problem before we realized the problem existed. What he said was, physicality is a representation. It's the way the world as it is in itself presents itself to us. But the world as it is in itself is not physical, it's will. In other words, it's consciousness. It's volitional states, experiential states of a volitional nature. It's desire, fear, things of that nature. And those experiential states present themselves to us according to physicality, and therefore they are relative to us, because the way something presents itself to you is of course relative to you. If you take my phone and you look it from this side or you look it from that side, you will see two different images. The way my phone presents itself to different observers is relative to the observer, but the phone as it is in itself in this metaphor is will. So if physicists today had been trained in a academic culture that had understood and truly internalized Schopenhauer's insights, there would be no dilemmas in quantum physics to begin with. They would have never arisen, because we would have all along understood that physics is a science of representation. It's not a science of what the world is in and of itself when it's not being observed. The latter is the will, transpersonal conscious states outside space and time.
So that's why you're a metaphysicist. A metaphysicist is because it's beyond physics, the physical.
Yeah. But even materialism is a metaphysics. Physics is about how nature behaves, not about what nature is in and of itself. Physics has no access to what nature is in and of itself, because it only has access to how nature presents itself to physicists through experiments. And what experiments do is they reveal how nature will behave under different circumstances. So physics is behavior. Metaphysics is what is prior to behavior. It's what underlies behavior. It's that which behaves. That's the source of the word metaphysics. We've now, in colloquial culture, we've conflated it with spirituality. Metaphysics is not spirituality. Metaphysics, any statement is metaphysical if it's a statement of the being in itself of things, what things are in and of themselves, as opposed to how they behave or how they present themselves to observation. So materialism is a metaphysics. Okay. It's not science, it's a metaphysics.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to Carl Jung, because his book, because I was told to ask about because Carl Jung was also an astrologer, no? Well, he was many things, but he was it the book Aeon had the crises in the past and how human history has been reflected by. So we're moving from the Piscean age to the
Aquarium. Yeah.
Do you know about? Could you explain about that? What?
I'm not versed in astrology. Jung saw everything in nature as being moved by certain inherent, intrinsic patterns of behavior, patterns of experience even, which he called the archetypes. And the archetypes, they determine how you behave. If you're not thinking clearly and thinking straight, if you're driven by emotion or by intuition, then you're being driven by a certain pattern of experiencing and behavior that he called an archetype. And you can regard an archetype as, in physics, you have the theory of vibration, that things vibrate according to certain harmonics that are intrinsic, natural modes of vibration to certain objects, like a guitar string has a natural mode of vibration that corresponds to the note it plays. If you pluck it, it will play certain notes and not others. Those are the archetypes of the guitar string.
Okay.
Like the guitar string, according to Jung, we also behave according to these fundamental modes that he called archetypes. And so does nature and the world at large. That's his hypothesis of synchronicity. So our historical development is ultimately driven by the dynamics of the different archetypes that underlie human behavior, collective human behavior. He saw Nazism, for instance, as an archetypal manifestation, the archetype of the collective shadow, the things in a culture that the culture rejects in itself, and therefore it has to project it onto another culture to deny it in themselves, even though it's in them all along. So the Nazis projected it on the Jews. The very characteristics that the Germans would not accept it in themselves. And the Germans are not privileged in this regard. And nearly every culture in this world has done something just as bad as they did. If you go back long enough British, in history, yeah. We shouldn't single them out. They are human like the rest of us. So from that perspective, you have these ages, these different tones, according to which human history unfolds in different historical junctions.
And that's reflected from the planets.
Because he thought that all nature is ultimately psychic, mental, he thought that the archetypes drive not only our behavior, but nature's behavior as well. In other words, everything in nature reflects an archetypal pattern in different ways. So in his view, it's not like the planets were influencing our inner life. That's not synchronicity, that's causality. And synchronicity is precisely a denial of causality. So the planets are not causing what happens to us. It's just that what happens to us and what happens to the planets both take a cue, a tone from an underlying archetypal pattern that is underlying both. So you see these resonances because both have the same underlying pattern of behavior, so to say. So nature at large is a symbolic manifestation of archetypes as they present themselves on the screen of perception. Therefore, the motion of the planets has a correspondence with human behavior, not because one causes the other, but because both have at its deepest level the same dynamic source.
So that fits with your theory. That's still part of the idealism.
Yes, in my view. Well, I think Jung was an outright idealist, and I wrote a book making that case. For Jung, what he called the archetypes were, and for Schopenhauer too, by the way, were what Plato already called the forms, or the ideas with big I. These basic templates of behavior, of manifestation that underlie everything, because for Jung, everything is a manifestation of one universal mind. And the archetypes manifest themselves everywhere because everything is a manifestation of that mind, and that mind operates according to these basic inherent templates. And that's why you see these archetypes almost manifesting in an almost fractal way. Everything reflects them because they are built into the fabric of nature itself, which is a mental fabric. And we have direct access to it in certain states of consciousness because we are it too.
Because was Carl Jung also into the psychic as well?
Jung was very much into the early studies on psychic phenomena done by, the name of that group escapes me now, the pioneering...
Theosophical Society?
Huh?
Was it the Theosophical Society?
No, it was a university in the US. How can I forget? There is a research center today named after this researcher who did this pioneering work in the 40s and the 50s. That provided some strong statistical evidence for the existence of what today you would call psi phenomena or paranormal, whatever. And Jung was very aware of it, and he explicitly, he didn't endorse it, but he was very explicit in leveraging those results. And therefore, implicitly, he was endorsing them because he leveraged them.
Yeah. And what's your stance on that?
I think certain things that under materialism must be considered impossible do happen, because they have happened to me and to people very close to me who I know for a fact couldn't have cheated. I don't think these things are spectacular. I think they are quite normal, and most people would find them quite normal. It's just that we are dissociated with our left brain. We're like, it's impossible. But with our right brain, we know intuitively that of course this happens. It's happening all the time. So the
paranormal is just a limit. The paranormal is just because our normal is too limited.
The boundary of the paranormal is the boundary of plausibility set by a certain cultural narrative,
a materialistic cultural narrative,
which is the one in evidence today, reigning today. Look, I'm not saying that certain fantastic things necessarily happen, and when you say paranormal, that's a very big bag. You can put lots of things in there, including a lot of things that I would consider outright absurd and not deserving of any serious consideration at all. But I can give you an example if you want.
That's the best way.
My girlfriend is an artist, and a few years ago we were traveling. We were in a very small village in the countryside of Germany, and for a week we were out of contact with friends and family because that's what we were there for. We wanted to just get out of the world and just be with nature for a few days. And one day, she woke up in the morning, and the first thing she told me was, I had an amazing dream. Very simple, but so intense, I can't shake it off. And I'm like, yeah, okay, what was it? And she said, I dreamed that my grandmother, who was alive and well when we left home, I dreamed that my grandmother was in hospital with a bandage on her head. Her two daughters were next to her. My girlfriend's father is the son of this woman, and she had also two daughters who were in the hospital with her. And in her dream, none of the three were moving, but she felt that her grandmother was telling her mentally that she was okay. And there was no movement in this dream. It was like one picture, the grandmother with the bandage in a hospital, her two sisters, one by each side, and the grandmother mentally saying, I am okay. And I thought, this is a peculiar dream. It's not the kind of dream that our own mind sort of generates in order to help us make sense of prior experiences. Yeah, it's a very dry, very specific dream. Mm-hmm. And then in an impulse, I told her, let's go home. And I knew that my girlfriend hadn't called anybody because I was with her 24 hours a day. So she called her father. First thing her father says is, your grandmother is in hospital. She has had how do you call that? When you when a blood vessel bursts inside your head.
Stroke, yeah.
A stroke. Your mother is in hospital. She has had a stroke. Your aunts are with her, and the doctor said she's out of danger.
There you go.
Every single thing in the dream, the bandage, a head problem. Yes, it was a stroke. Her daughters next to her, yes, they were in hospital. She was in hospital, like in the dream. And the message, I am okay. Yes, she was out of danger.
So was she projecting? To astral projection in the body?
The way I would make sense of this, because you see, when we talk about words like astral and projection, I'm not sure what we mean by that. There's so much, these words can be so loaded. So the way I would explain this to myself is, look, we are all dissociated elements of one universal mind. So we are all part of one mind. And sometimes the dissociation gets, the dissociative boundary gets permeable and porous, and information gets in that otherwise would be filtered out because it's not useful for our survival. That's how we evolved. We evolved to only be explicitly aware of what is of immediate significance for our survival. The predator that can kill us, the food we need to eat, the things we need to do. We evolved to close our way to filter out everything that's not immediately relevant. But if we are all in the same mind, this filtering mechanism, who said that it's perfect 100% of the time? Sometimes information may leak across dissociative boundaries, and you can have access to information that is not coming through your five senses. That's how I would make sense of this to myself. Now, if you define the words astral and projection in such a way that it matches what I said, then yes, I believe in astral projection.
It's just because I'm also a student of metaphysics for a year now, but it's a very different, because obviously metaphysics is a huge pool. It's like, there's so many different physicists, but the metaphysics I've been studying is more of the Indian base. So that we have this, we don't just have a physical body, we have an astral body and a mental body and an aura. And when you die, you leave the physical, and then you go into the astral body. So, so when you have the control of the body. So when you do these exercises like pranayama or mantra, you merge your psychic senses with your physical senses. So you gain these extra powers, which are, like you're saying, they should be yours to have. So do you have any experience with these they're like this sort of aspect of metaphysics?
Personal experience,
or from studying? Do you know that you can activate your chakras and raise kundalini and merge your psychic senses and experience these things firsthand rather than?
I am very careful with words. When we say words like chakras and kundalini, what exactly do we mean by that? And that's why I avoid using these words, because I may be interpreted in a way that I have no control over. People will take away from what I'm saying whatever they want, because the words are not clearly defined. I think it is conceivable that the dissociative process that we are as individual human beings can be hierarchical. It is conceivable that when life as we know ends, that we don't become oceanic consciousness again, but we fall back into another dissociative level that precedes this one, and from that to another, and yet another, which could maybe correspond to what you mean by mental body, astral body, and all these things. I take Indian philosophy seriously, but I also take it with a grain of salt when it comes to the words used, because Vedas, for instance, that message is 3,500 years old, which makes it very reliable, but also places a lot of responsibility on the reader on how to interpret it, because they were written at a time when there was no such a thing as a notion of literal truth. This notion of literality, something that is true at the cost of every other possible way of looking at it, one truth that eliminates everything else as possible truths. This what we call literal truth. This didn't exist in human mind until relatively recent in our history as metacognitive sentient beings. So people thought analogically through analogy. That's our early mode of thinking, and therefore it's our early mode of communicating. There is a fantastic episode of Star Trek Next Generation from the 80s in which Picard and the crew, they meet some aliens who are unable to speak literally. They only speak through analogy and metaphor, and their universal translator goes crazy, and it takes human beings to figure out how to communicate with them. You have to study their myths so you understand their analogies and metaphors. So I think we were that alien species until not very long ago. And it's only a thing of the Enlightenment, this literal truth thing. It started a couple of 100 years ago. So when we read texts that are older than that, we have to read them. I think it's our responsibility with the glasses of communication by analogy. That's the way to interpret them correctly and do justice to them. Otherwise, you just flatten them into a shadow of what they could have been. I mean, religious myths are interpreted literally today, which to me is as big an affront to religion as atheism. It's just as bad as atheism. To deny religion altogether is as bad as to interpret religious mythology literally. It just destroys it, flattens it. You ignore what it's trying to do. And the same applies, I think, for ancient Indian philosophy, which I regard with more than respect. I think I regard it with profound admiration, even, which goes beyond respect. But I think we have to be very careful when we use words like chakras, projection, astral stuff, and subtle bodies. We have to be careful with that. What do we mean really by that?
Are you also familiar with the Theosophical Society and the
Philosophical Society?
The Theosophical Society
was
founded
Theosophy.
in the 18. Yeah, Theosophy.
Yeah, Elena Blavatsky and all that crew.
Yes.
I'm not familiar enough to give you an informed opinion. I'm afraid not.
Okay. No, I'm just saying, and because I tried to get everyone I interviewed to join the Etheria Society. It's a modern metaphysical organization. I'll send you a link after the show. It's a very it's based on Indian. It's based on yoga techniques that raise Kundalini and then communicate with teachers from a higher realms. So it does. I'm not sure it's quite. I don't think it would be quite what you're into, but I still try.
I'm open-minded to look at things.
So, but I've just remembered I have to write a song about this. So I don't know. I think I'll just have to study your website for another couple of weeks before I can, re-listen to this podcast, because you've just gone so deep. I mean, so many. So it's been so fascinating, and I just wanted to ask you one last thing about biocentrism. Is that an alternative to idealism? What was?
I heard of it. A million people have pointed me to it. I think the creator of biocentrism, based on his CV, is a person we cannot dismiss, but I have not studied it.
Okay.
I have a very superficial understanding of it as entailing that we call the world is just how the world presents itself to a biological organism, and therefore life is prior to physics, because physics is a construction of life.
So they're in agreement with you?
At this superficial level, I would say it's 100% in agreement with me. I endorse everything I've just said. And insofar as this applies to biocentrism, I endorse this aspect of biocentrism. But I cannot go beyond this scratching the surface level, because I haven't studied the materials in enough depth yet, which is a shame. I mean, you would think that somebody who communicates what I communicate would have the responsibility of looking
not
at
the time, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
how many hours in the day?
That's the thing. There are so many other things that you could look at me and say, it is your responsibility to be aware of that too. That I just can't.
Are you a speed reader? I mean, how are you reading so much all the time? Or
I'm not a speed reader. No. I am a speed writer.
Okay.
But when I read, it is not a very fast process, because I need the thing to become my own. Yeah.
You need to read a paragraph and go away and think about it. And
I need to make it my own. And the process of making it my own is like a slow cooking process. You can't rush it. But once it's done, then I completely internalize it. Then it becomes an integral part of me. I know what to do with it, with the parts that I accept, with the parts that I reject. I know why I accept, why I reject, and how I will use what I accept. But that cooking process is is simmering, not boiling.
And so what's the red line in your work? What's the central agenda, the central value, the central, what?
These are different. These are all different things, and I think my central values are the same as the mainstream academic culture today: reductionism, naturalism, explanatory power, empiricism, logical consistency. All this stuff. That's what drives me as values, as epistemic values. My agenda is to help change the culture. I think our culture today is both untrue and toxic.
Right.
When it's toxic, but on the basis of everything we know, there is reason to think it's also true, then too bad. Let it be toxic. It's just the price we pay for existing in reality. If it's true and also toxic, we have to bite the bullet. But when we have every reason to think it's untrue and it's also toxic, then we are paying an unnecessary price. So my agenda is to help change it, because I think metaphysical materialism is both demonstrably untrue and extremely toxic. So my agenda is to help change that.
By pushing idealism?
By pushing, on the one hand, a criticism, a rational, empirical criticism of materialism, and offering an alternative as well. Because we live in a society that if you just criticize and you don't offer an alternative, you may be ignored, maybe even legitimately. People may point to you and say, yeah, you only talk about the problems, but you don't offer a solution.
Yeah, so people do that.
Yeah, then you're an activist. You're not engaged in the dialogue. You're an activist. I don't want to be an activist. I want to be a legitimate participant in the cultural dialogue. So with my left hand, I will offer a slap, and with my right hand, I will hand an alternative.
Okay, so the hand should not, the song should not be the right hand. The song should be the And, so what can I say? What is the solution that you're proposing?
It is all a play of mind in mind. Everything that's happening is mental. It's not in your personal mind alone. There is mentation out there that you cannot control as an individual conscious agent, but it's all in mind. And your mind, your core subjectivity will never disappear, because it is that within which everything is unfolding. Your core subjectivity is my core subjectivity, is the core subjectivity of the universe as a whole. As Schopenhauer said, the one eye of the world that looks out from every creature. And this is a dance of mind. Reality is what mind does when it hallucinates and deceives itself into thinking that it's really true. That's what we call reality. It's a play of mind.
Didn't you say that psychedelics are sort of anesthetize the brain, so that you
psychedelics reduce brain activity?
So you're also talking about near-death experiences, like that. That's proof because when the brain activity is reduced and people have experiences that are above that's contradictory. No, I mean you can't have an incredible experience when your brain's shut down. Yeah. So obviously the mind is above the brain.
Yeah, the brain, I think, is the image of a particular process in mind. It's not the totality of mind. It's how a part of mind presents itself to observation.
You used the analogy of a whirlpool, didn't you? There is a whirlpool.
Yeah, there's only the lake. But when whirlpools form, you can point at them and say, there is a whirlpool. We can delineate their boundaries. And yet there is nothing to the whirlpool but the lake. I think there is nothing to us but universal consciousness. We are just local patterns of dissociation in universal consciousness, like a whirlpool in the lake. You can point at a person and say, there's the person. We can delineate the boundaries of the person, and yet there is nothing to the person but universal consciousness, just as there is nothing to the whirlpool but the lake. I think it's analogous. And the pattern you alluded to is much broader than psychedelics. There is a broad pattern of reduction or impairment of ordinary brain activity and expanded consciousness, enriched conscious inner life, which seems to contradict materialism. I still haven't found a way to reconcile it with materialism, because under materialism, brain activity is experience. So how can you have more experience when you have a lot less brain activity?
So what do the materialists say when you propose that to them, when you argue with them in the
they
philosophy
play,
cafe?
they play a very interesting game of offering different explanations for the same thing, depending on the evidence you confront them with. Let me make this more concrete. There is this technology today called brain image extraction.
Right.
In other words, you can hook a person to a brain scanner that measures patterns of brain activity. And you can then show a movie or a photo to the person. And you can have a researcher look at the patterns of brain activity without access to the photo or the movie the person is actually looking at. And on the basis of that pattern of brain activity alone, the researcher can infer what the subject is looking at or what the subject is dreaming of. And we know that because we just used big data to correlate gazillion gigabytes of brain imaging information with the images that we have shown to those people as we collected the brain image information. So we don't know how the brain, why there is this correlation between brain activity and the images, but we understand that there is that correlation and we can exploit that, even if we don't understand the underlying mechanisms. So we can extract an image from the brain of a person just by looking at the patterns of brain activity. Mm-hmm. So then a materialist will say, of course, because those patterns of brain activity are generating the experience.
But that's why
proof. We can do... this explanation coheres with this particular evidence.
But then, that's the problem with science, you know,
But then you show the materialist other pieces of evidence. For instance, psychedelics. A psychedelic experience is undeniably at least one of the most intense, rich, structured, mind-boggling experiences a human being can have. And I say that to you with first-person experience. Some of my psychedelic experiences have been by far the most intense, richest, unforgettable experiences of my life. And we know that psychedelics only reduce brain activity everywhere. There is no increase anywhere of any significance. When they find a little increase, they explain it away as an artifact of measurement or the temporal or spatial resolution of the scanner. They themselves do it. And then you tell them, okay, but if the brain is generating experience, then materialism is untrue in this case. And then they say, well, but it's not only brain activity, it's entropy that generates experience. And entropy is another word for disorderly brain activity, randomness in the brain. Because once they realized in 2012 that psychedelics only reduce brain activity, they panicked. That's my way of putting it. And they scrambled to find something in the brain that does increase during a psychedelic experience to save materialism. And then you play all kinds of mathematical tricks with the data. You apply transformations in your data until you come to something that increases. And they found something that increases. It increases a percent amount, a tiny little amount that is on the edge of statistical significance. And what increases is the amount of disorder in your brain activity. In other words, your brain activity reduces.
Okay.
But it becomes a little tiny bit more disorderly. And then they say, well, it's the disorderedness that explains the increased experience. Now, that is preposterous from the get-go, because a psychedelic trip is not disorderly. You can have a psychedelic trip that is incredibly coherent, internally consistent. It's structured. There is nothing entropic and disorderly about it. So that's a contradiction already to begin with. But even if you give them, the freedom, okay, let's say, okay, let's pretend that this makes sense. But then it contradicts all the rest of the evidence. All the evidence that you have when you do brain imaging extraction, for instance, or things like, scientists can look at your patterns of brain activity and deduce that you're dreaming about looking at a statue. In other words, there is enough activation in your brain activity when you're dreaming of staring at a statue the most boring experience that you probably can conceive of. It's staring at a statue. And yet in a dream with your eyes closed, there is enough activation corresponding to that for scientists to say, we know he's dreaming of staring at a statue. That's research done in Japan a few years ago. So for dreams, they say, oh, you see, brain activity generates the dream. But for psychedelics, it's disorderedness on the edge of statistical significance. And it's a tiny, I mean, to defend, I mean, I admire people who set out to defend materialism today because it's becoming a very tough job.
Oh, yeah.
It's edging on the ridiculous today.
But so are you teaching the new generation? I mean, are you involved in because I'm sure I understand if you have a rigid mind, if you're, if you've been working in it and you have a nice house and your mortgage is relied upon the university's paying it or your business is paying it, you've got to put the kids in school. You can't go against the system if you're doing this. But are you involved with the new generation? Are you enabling this, taking this battle to?
I'm doing my best. I'm starting a new foundation now, Essentia Foundation. We are not public yet. We are still working on, our strategic communication plans and how we are going to go about it. So it's early stages. Wait a few more months before something comes out.
Wow!
But the objective is precisely this: is to, as you said, we are within the system. We cannot fight the system from outside the system. It's impossible. So we have to work towards the betterment of the system from within it. And that's what we want to do with the Essentia Foundation. We're not going to try to twist anybody's arms. We're not going even to try to persuade anybody, but we will extend an invitation for people to have a second look at why we think what we think today, an invitation for people to re-examine or examine their assumptions, most of which go completely unexamined, and ponder some alternative hypotheses that may be a lot better than the reigning metaphysics of materialism, to make sense of the empirical data, and maybe better even on the grounds of conceptual parsimony, logical internal consistency, explanatory power, all those things that we all agree are important. So yes, the answer is yes. Yeah.
Some common ground, a unified force. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the name? What was the name of the foundation again?
Essentia Foundation, the Latin word for essence, essentia.
Okay.
And then the idea is to make clear that it's a foundation about metaphysics, because physics is not about essence. Physics is about behavior. The essence that behaves escapes the methodology of science. It's something that you have to ponder according to the methods of philosophy, ontology specifically. So we want to be very clear already in the name that we will be talking about ontology.
And so where can people find more information about this? Should they go to your website?
Currently, you cannot find information at all about it because we haven't come out yet. We are still doing all the background work, behind the stage. When we come out, we want to come out right. We want to have something that people can already extract some value from, as opposed to just a placeholder. So please be a little bit more patient.
And who is the we? Is it international, pan-European, pan-American?
It is pretty international, yes. Wow. I'm not at liberty yet to say who the we are.
Yeah.
I am at liberty to say that I am part of the we.
Well, that's wonderful. I've met one of the we. Well, if you're on, if there's any way I can support you, you should be on Patreon. I feel like I should be supporting you because just with the energy, with the work you're doing, it's so. I've never met anyone like you. I mean, I can't believe. I'm so grateful to have spent an evening. It's like watching some amazing TV program, but I get to ask questions every.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
So people should go to your website, bernardokastrup.com.
Yeah. Whenever Essentia becomes a real entity out there, you will be able to see a link from my website as well. We immediately link to it.
Okay, brilliant. And this song, I'm going to sound so smart with this song because I just have to make your words rhyme, and I'm going to sound like a genius. So I appreciate you with great material like this. So is there any particular, would you like the song about ascension?
No, just let it come to you.
Don't. It come. Okay,
yeah.
I'll be in the shower and. Gosh, well, I need to narrow it down because I'll have to go through your website because you've just covered so much ground and it's been fantastic. I've had such a great time chatting to you.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me in the show, by the way.
No, thank you. Thanks for spending this evening with me, and I'm sure you're staying up late to write now. So I hope you can.
Sun's still out. It's okay.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'm really looking forward to everything, to the new book and to this new foundation, and I'll keep supporting you in any way I can. So please keep me up to date with everything you're doing.
We do so. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bernardo.
Take care, man. Bye.
Bye. It's stitched into the sitcom, sewn into the news, twisted in the movies, it underwrites your views, pumped in by the television, reinforced in school, seeps into your every hole, but you're nobody's fool. It permeates and advocates, corroborates, separates, venerates our physical traits while vindicating violent states, perpetuates, subordinates, implicates with primates, culminates in selfish hate that enumerates, exterminates. Oh no, they're selling you a prison. Don't buy the lie of materialism. It's becomingly conceived and slyly concealed, dripped into your consciousness, now it has congealed. You're just purely physical, you're a piece of meat. Who cares if I beat you or emotionally mistreat you? Soul starvation, strangulation, spiritual castration, secularized, sexualized, glamorized with vacant lies, temptation and gratification, physical adoration, simulation of civilization, societal transmogrification. Oh no, they're selling you a prison. Don't buy the lie of materialism. As they whisper their commands, preaching the dualities of physical realities, with distorted mineralities for limited mentalities, contorted tonalities, temporal modalities, separate nationalities for global criminalities. Oh no, they're selling you a prison. Don't buy the lie of materialism. Thanks, we had fun with that one. Hope you liked it. If you want to hear it again, please download it from our website, podsongs.com/music for $1. Or you can stream on Spotify 312 times, and then we'll also get $1. So, depends on your level of fandom. However you can support us is greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank Maurizio Sarnicola, my producer, Massimino Vodza, the other great musician I work with, Dori Verba, my researcher, and you, the listener, for tuning in. Thanks for your time.